Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Clemson. My name is Kathy Crane. I'm a member of the board, and today I am your worship associate. I'm very glad to be with you today. We are missing our minister today, our interim minister, Reverend Christina Branham Martin. So we will miss her, and we wish her well on her journey this week. She will return next Sunday for a very invigorating and full Sunday morning. You've got postcards all over the place. It's just going to be a day of joy. Hopefully you received yours in the mail too. And there's going to be a potluck. There's going to be chalk drawing on the parking lot out here. It's going to be a challenge to see how we can get all of that technologically shared, but we'll do our best. And there'll also be a potluck and blowing bubbles and music and, oh yes, a service too. So please be sure to be here next Sunday. Here at the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Clemson, we like to do a lot of things together, and we welcome you to this Sunday morning and any of the activities in which you would like to be involved. On the back of the program, you'll see lots of things that are ongoing. We appreciate Carl Dieter kind of summarizing these for us from the e-news that's emailed to all of us called The Weekly. If you do not receive that e-news, you can talk to Jarrell, our welcome person, and Celeste, and they can get you. Wait a minute, no, you were the ushers. Sorry. You can talk to Karen York, who was working the welcome table this morning, and she can get you signed up for that. Sorry, thank you for ushering this morning. I saw that moment of panic. So I want to point out some announcements to you. And those of you who are sitting in the back have an easy view of our rainbow knitted sock on that tree out front. And you have a nice view of the repair that Petra and Marty put up, because we are fairly certain, some intentional damage to our knitted sock. And it's not going away. And so Petra and Marty repaired it for us. Reverend Christina noted that it happened, and so it was quickly repaired. Other things I want to point out, this is going to be a real busy week for fellowship activities. On Wednesday, Sarah Summers Hoskin, back there with the view of the sock. Sarah's going to she's going to lead a hula hike. Hiking UU Ladies is what that stands for, but these days guys are welcome too. So if you want to be involved with that hike, there's information, and talk to Sarah. Saturday is going to be a really, really busy day. It's going to start off with the Spring Jubilee Festival down the road in Pendleton. Andy Nelson has tickets that are available to a breakfast at the Pendleton Community Center's annual breakfast, which is returning after, can you guess, a COVID absence. So that's going to be happening in the morning. During the day on Saturday, Dell, what time? 10 till noon, I'm sorry. From 10 till noon is a depolarizing workshop here that Dell Kimbler is hosting. There's still time to sign up for that. And then that evening, no sign up is necessary, just go. The Greenville Unitarian Universalist Fellowship, fondly known as GOOF, will be hosting a concert at 7:30 that evening with Deidre McCullough. Karen York at the welcome table can also point out the new button sign up. The old ones got kind of old, and so we're looking for new ones right now, so please sign up to get yourself one. And finally, see Holly at the activities table during the social time for information on acting out on bills here in South Carolina relating to book censorship and transgender concerns. These are scary times with our South Carolina legislature. Speaking of social time, that is down the hall to the left. Thank you to Elaine Faithful for preparing us a wonderful feast with coffee where we can go and socialize afterwards. Welcome, everybody. Let's turn to music, hymn number 143. Thank you, Corey. Perhaps weary, worn with the failures, the years, and the passing of strength, and still others, the men and women determined, filled with the zeal of battle for justice yet to be, and for the truth still denied or undiscovered. Each and all of us, whatever we may be, must come to the time when we need to be still. There comes a time when we must know the need to go apart and meditate, to seek the meanings of our lives. Then reconsider the purposes we have accepted, and to establish peace within ourselves. The world presses on us too insistently. The appetites too imperiously demand of us, and we forget to be real persons in ourselves. May this moment be one of redemption, of renewal of faith in life and the living of it. May the disciplines of humility and courage be strengthened from this time. May it bring a rediscover of self and a lifting of the heart with a sense of newness from that discovery, new courage, fresh vigor, and a deeper thoughtfulness for the living of life from this day.
Now I'd like to invite Katie forward to help me light the chalice. Cody. I'm thinking of Katie Cruz. Cody. Welcome. And as Cody lights the chalice, I invite you to share in our words of affirmation. We gather together in a spirit of love, with justice as our guide. This is our chosen covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth with freedom, and to care for one another. Thank you. Our theme for today is about heresy, and we have an appropriate children's story to deal with that theme, but not that particular word. Karen?
Good morning. This morning's story is actually doing duty on a number of levels, not just for the theme of the service this morning, but also because as a welcoming congregation, throughout the calendar year, we mark some of the LGBTQ days of observance. And this coming Friday, March the 31st, I'm getting ahead of myself by quite a while. March the 31st is the International Day of Trans Visibility, which honors and recognizes those transgender individuals that do indeed exist amongst us. And if you will have been paying attention to the news, you will notice that there is a great deal of anti-trans legislation going on in our country. The American Civil Liberties Union has 480 bills, I think, right now that they are tracking throughout the United States in various state legislatures. The South Carolina state legislature, as has been pointed out this morning, is amongst the worst. We have 18 different bills currently before our legislature that are anti-trans. So today's story this morning is Red, a Crayon Story by Michael Hall, as told by the pencil. He was red, but he wasn't very good at it. Oh dear. His teacher thought he needed more practice. Scarlet said, "I'll draw a red strawberry, then you draw a red strawberry. You can do this, really." But he couldn't, really. "Oh my," said Scarlet, "let's try again." His mother thought he needed to mix with other colors. "Why don't you two go out and draw a nice round orange? Yeah, a really big one, a really orange one." But they made a big greenish one. Yuck. Oops. His grandparents thought he wasn't warm enough. "Your class is making self-portraits for Parents' Night. Wear this warm red scarf. Nice. It's so you." But it so wasn't. Oh, dear me. All the colors had something to say. Amber said, "Sometimes I wonder if he's really red at all." Hazelnut said, "Don't be silly, it says red on his label." Cocoa Bean said, "He came that way from the factory." Fuchsia commented, "Frankly, I don't think he's very bright." Grape said, "Well, I think he's lazy." Army Green agreed. "Right, he's got to press harder. Really apply himself," added Steel Gray. Sunshine Yellow said, "Give him time, he'll catch on." Sea Green agreed, "Of course he will." But he didn't catch on. Green drew a green frog, Black drew a black sheep, Brown drew a brown cow, and Red tried to draw a red ant, but all the art supplies wanted to help. The masking tape thought Red was broken inside, so he gave Red tape to hold him together. Scissors thought his label was too tight, so she gave him a little snip. And I, Pencil, thought he wasn't sharp enough. But even with all our help and all his hard work, he just couldn't get the hang of it. One day, he met a new friend named Barry. And Barry asked, "Will you make a blue ocean for my boat?" "I can't, I'm red." "Will you try?" So he did. "Thank you," said Barry, "it's perfect." "You're welcome, it was easy." And he didn't stop there. He made bluebells and blue jeans and bluebirds and blueberries and a blue whale. "I'm blue," he exclaimed. He was blue, and everyone was talking. His mother, Olive, said, "My son is brilliant." Amber asked, "Who could have known he was blue?" Hazelnut replied, "I always said he was blue." "It was obvious," added Cocoa Bean. "His blue ocean really lifted me," said Barry. Seagreen raved, "All his work makes me happy." Brown said, "His blue strawberries are my favorite." "He's so intense," said Applegreen. Yellow said, "I'm going to make a green lizard with him, a really big one." Gray said, "I hear he's working on a new project." Scarlet said, "He's really reaching for the sky." And he really was.
Did you? Wow, that's neat. This is the time in our service where we collect the morning offering, as is appropriate for a free church that is supported by voluntary contributions. If you want to contribute to our benevolence of the month, which is Clemson Child Development Center, 25% of the unpledged offering goes to CCC. Yeah, just wait. She's getting the wagon, and we'll have wagon service in just a minute. Here it comes. Yep, there's more stuff. This is the time in our service where we share our joys and concerns. And one of our joys is visitors. So if we have any visitors this morning who feel inclined to stand up, and first-time visitors, second-time visitors, been away for a long time and came back, any of those categories, if you want to stand up and introduce yourselves, then we'll repeat your introduction from the mic. Any visitors?
Hi, I'm Brad. Second time.
Hi, Brad.
Nice to meet y'all.
Yeah, welcome. Anyone else?
Hello, I'm Albert. I'm brother to Jennifer, and I'm passing through, but I'm glad to be here.
Welcome. Okay, it's good to have you here. Okay, Dave and Karen Sanders have a joy, I think. They didn't check. Our dear friend Evelyn in Houston shared some personal, it's a sorrow. Okay, let me start again. Our dear friend Evelyn in Houston shared some personal grief that she is dealing with regarding her family. Our thoughts, prayers, and healing energy go out to her. Kathy Crane has a joy. Our UUFC Habitat for Humanity team enjoyed framing walls for a home building in Easley yesterday. Watch for a picture in the weekly. Carol Ward has a joy. Thanks to Rose Ellen for her women's retreat yesterday. I bet it was really good. Okay. Gordon Crane, his joy is I want to celebrate a good morning with UUFC friends at the Habitat work site. Okay. And if you want to join the team, Gordon's here, so tell him you want to help. Rosellen's joy is thanks for the fellowship for hosting the women's retreat we held yesterday. Celebrate all the women who attended. And Carl Dieter's joy is that Janice is home from California after 16 days. That's great. Okay. And one last pebble for joys and sorrows not shared that you are holding within you. Joys shared are multiplied, and joys and sorrows shared are lessened. Thank you, Kathy. And now we'll sing the children on their way. You can remain seated while we sing Spirit of Life, number 123 in the hymnal. Many years ago, I was walking down King Street in Charleston, and I spied a bookstore. Not being able to pass one by, I went in. I discovered it was a Catholic bookstore. Nevertheless, I was sure that I, heretic though I am, could find something worth reading. I did. It was called Dissent from the Creed. In its pages were some of the most thought-provoking alternative views of the Christian faith, each followed by a decisive but unconvincing explanation of why it was wrong to think that way. I must confess, I kind of looked at it like it as a cookbook. Oh, I think I'll try that one. That looks good. The words heretic and heresy come from a Greek verb, herein, which means to choose. Those who choose their belief rather than accepting the authority of bishops and synods as to what they should believe were therefore labeled heretics. It's pretty safe today to be a religious heretic, although being a political heretic might be a slightly riskier way to be. Our own faith tradition is named for two persistent, stubborn heresies originating in the 2nd and 3rd centuries. Universalism, thanks to early church father Origen, is the belief that a loving God would not condemn any of his children to eternal damnation. That belief has always held first place as the most popular heresy among Christians. The other heresy is that Jesus is not God, which was popular with Greeks and Romans, but very much in keeping with Judaism and later with Islam. God-filled, perhaps, but not God. Or, as I always ask if I believe that Jesus was divine, I respond, yes, and so are you, and so am I. Jesus just got a bigger helping. While the debate on the Trinity went on for some length in the 3rd and 4th centuries, with Arius as the leader of the non-Trinitary faction, I always say he put the Arian and Unitarian. This doctrine surfaced again in modern times, thanks in large part to another heretical hero, Michael Servetus. He was a Spaniard who was burned at the stake not by the Catholic Church, but by the Protestants in Geneva under Count John Calvin in 1553 for denying the Trinity. But Origen, Arius, and Servetus were not alone. There were many over the centuries who dissented from the creeds because they were set in stone as a test of faith in the Roman Catholic Church, as it became increasingly more Roman and less Catholic because the word Catholic means universal. Today, I want to introduce you to a less familiar but very congenial heretic, at least to us UUs. His name was Pelagius. and he was a well-educated 5th century Welsh monk. He was a contemporary of Augustine, who gave us some of the very worst doctrines of the Roman Church: original sin, predestination, substitutionary atonement, which in ordinary language is Jesus died for our sins. Not Pelagius. The opposite of original sin is original blessing, that we are created in the image of God as good, or at least with a potential for both good and evil, because we have free will. We are not predestined at birth to heaven or hell by an all-knowing God. God's grace combined with our free will leads us to choose good over evil. Sounds good to me. One expression of this alternative way of thinking was the controversy over infant baptism. According to Pelagius and others, including our contemporary brothers and sisters of the Baptist tradition, infants do not need to be baptized for the forgiveness of sins because they are not capable of sin. I know that if you've ever had an infant and they scream all day, and you may question that, but I'll give them some space. Jesus, in fact, did not die for our sins. He died for the sins of the Roman Empire, which subsequently continued a tradition of power, violence, hierarchy, and misogyny in his name. The Eastern Church, however, declared that the teachings of Pelagius were orthodox. Orthodox means right teaching. The Eastern Church found his teachings to be consistent with Scripture, which Pelagius read fluently in the original Greek, unlike Augustine, who read them in Latin. But Augustine won the political battle, and his views reigned as Roman Catholic orthodoxy well into modern times. Even the Lutheran, Anglican, and Calvinist traditions of the Reformation did not challenge most of this theology. It was left to the radical Reformation that produced Baptists, Unitarians, Mennonites, Amish, and other dissenters to challenge that theology, and many of them paid a very high price. Pelagius, like any great thinker, did not spring out of nowhere. You all know the quote from Isaac Newton that I have been able to see so far because I stood on the shoulders of giants. His thinking was a product of his Celtic culture, which we know today as Scottish, Irish, and Welsh, as well as parts of South and West England and other places. Before the Roman Empire, before the Greek Empire under Alexander, there were people the Greeks called Keltoi, with a K. And by the way, I know that some of you like basketball and you call them the Baltic Celtics, but they actually should be called the Boston Celtics, but that's another story. They occupied most of Europe north of the Mediterranean. Today they occupy the fringes of the Roman world. Pushed to the edges of empire, the Celts once ranged all over Europe. If you ever took high school Latin, and you remember any of it, you may recall that Julius Caesar started his Gallic wars with Omnis Gallia in tres partes divisa est, a little geography lesson. All Gaul is divided into 3 parts. Well, the Gauls, who inhabited much of what is now France, were Celts. And the label Gaul gave its name to the Celtic language, which is Gaelic. When the Apostle Paul wrote his letter to the Galatians, they were a group of Celtic converts to Christianity in the middle of what is modern-day Turkey. Pockets of Celts remain in Western Europe, the Spanish province of Galicia on the northwest tip of the Iberian Peninsula, and Brittany in France, but most modern Celts live in British Isles with large colonies in the US, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, and especially Boston. From the time of St. Patrick, the Celtic Church embodied a more hopeful, more joyful, more nature-centered, more tolerant, and less sexist way of being Christian. Central to their faith and practice was the legacy of the Druids in the old religion. Druids taught that we should be at home in nature, embracing the earth and this life, rather than focusing on the afterlife. They did sort of believe in afterlife, a rebirth of souls, more like Hinduism and Buddhism than the Christian version. Most of what I know about Celtic Christianity comes from 2 sources. One is the history of the always underground Celtic Church, which appeared to have accepted Roman ways, but maintained a different way of being religious. The other is what I like to call the cult of Sister Fidelma. And if you get to know me well enough, chances are I will invite you to join the cult. Any cult members? Hold up your hands. Sarah, Janie, Ann. Martha? Are you remember the cult? No. Okay. Anyway. I haven't done a good evangelism job, I guess. Anyway, Sister Fidelma is the fictional creation of a medieval British scholar named Peter Beresford Ellis. She is the sister of the King of Mooman modern Munster, and she was well-educated and an independent woman who was a dalech, or another officer of the court, kind of a combination prosecutor and defense attorney, depending on what was needed. She has interesting adventures in a series of novels set in 7th century Ireland. I've passed my books around to my friends, there's 32 of them so far, and they found themselves much in agreement, not only with her theological openness to followers of the old pre-Christian nature religion, but also to a society that is grounded in nature and practices hospitality, equality, and nonviolence. Not that the Celts could not be fierce warriors when they chose to, but they just basically did not punish people with, executing them or anything like that. Pelagianism did not end with his death in 418. It was alive and well in Ireland and Scotland for centuries. When St. Patrick is credited with bringing Christianity to Ireland, the Irish and Scottish versions of Christianity were very different. Now, I know that the big fight in the 7th century was over the way the monks cut their hair and when they celebrated Easter. But underneath those kind of iffy issues, there were some big ones. In their world, women were equal. Nuns and monks lived in co-houses, presided over by an abbess and an abbot, and they were free to marry and raise their children in the faith. Women could be educated and occupy learned professions. The old religion was not discarded. Instead, they just added Jesus to their pantheon while continuing to honor the wisdom of the Druids and the strong sense of the sacredness of nature. A whole series of Irish and Scottish teachers and mystics continued the preservation of this rich heritage, including Bridget of Kildare, John Scotus Eriugena, which means born in Ireland, and in our day, John Philip Newell, whom Anne and I had the pleasure of meeting last October. While the Irish and Scottish churches eventually surrendered to Roman Catholic control at the Synod of Whitby in the 7th century, they were far enough from Rome to continue to preserve the old ways and the old traditions. Remnants of the old faith persist in spring house cleaning for Groundhog Day, the maypole, Halloween, and the Yule log, and in some of our Christmas carols. Everybody has a theology, whether they just adopted someone else's or whether it's shaped by reflection and experience. Why does theology matter? Because theology affirms or sometimes distorts our understanding of human nature and our way of being in the world. A view of man as hopelessly wicked and unable to save himself leads to an authoritarian view of God in society. A theology of humanity created in the image of God and possessing some degree of free will leads to hopefulness, openness to change, and respect for our fellow beings, human and otherwise. It leads to religious and political democracy. It matters what we believe. I'm sure that most of you have Christianity in your DNA, your family, and certainly your community. There are many aspects of Christianity that are a rich part of our heritage. Some UUs, like me, are faithful to our liberal religious understanding, but sometimes yearn for more richness of ritual to celebrate our community with one another and the natural world. We don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. We want to keep the baby, dry him off, dress the infant Jesus in a nice onesie, and invite him into our lives. Celtic Christianity is an alternative path, as I said, that traces back to origin and universal salvation. It can embrace our heretic Michael Servetus and the Unitarianism of Francis David, King John Sigmund of Transylvania, and the New England Transcendentalists. The understanding of God in the modern Celtic tradition is very panentheistic. Not pantheist, because that's just God is nature, but rather the presence of the sacred in all things, matters, and beings. When I was growing up in New England, my parents were Congregationalists on my mother's side and Methodists on my father's side. Since my parents split before I even got baptized, I was raised in my mother's faith tradition. Today, the Congregationalists are the United Church of Christ, a progressive denomination that embraces LGBTQ, and 70% of whose ministers do not believe in the divinity of Jesus. In other words, they're closet Unitarians. In fact, some of them joke that their letters, UCC, actually stand for Unitarians Contemplating Christ. When I attended Pilgrim Fellowship and sang from the Pilgrim Hymnal, I felt like I was embracing and affirming my ethnic identity. But it took Ancestry.com and modern Celtic Christian theologian John Philip Newell to bring me home. I knew I had Scottish ancestors, but I didn't know that 43% of my DNA is Scottish, Irish, and Welsh, all from my mother's side. On my father's side, I am nominally English, whatever that means, but with a heavy infusion from the Norman invasion from Gallic and therefore Celtic France. And then there is my favorite, a mysterious 1% Jewish, affirming my monotheism and the centrality of justice and covenant that are the heritage of that very rich religious tradition. So whether or not you claim Celtic ancestry, as I do and probably many of you do, the theological understanding and the practices of Celtic Christianity may speak to you as it does to me. It helps me to reclaim what I value from the Christian tradition while scraping off the barnacles that accrued during the Roman domination of the church and continued despite suppression through the mainstream of the Reformation. Some of the resistance to this kinder, gentler, more inclusive form of Christianity still came from within the Roman Church in the last century. They did try to silence Jesuit priest and paleontologist Teilhard de Chardin as he attempted to reconcile Christian theology and modern science. But his writings were preserved, and today he is a hero of modern theologians of all stripes. At Chautauqua this past summer, I listened to a Benedictine nun and theology professor toss out original sin by saying, "Oh, that was just Augustine trying to please his mother," presumably because of his wild youth before he got religion. The nun then proceeded to toss out predestination, Jesus died for our sins, and other odd doctrines dating to the Roman captivity of the Christian faith that created guilt and fear to encourage people to accept authority. This new religious synthesis is broad enough to embrace people as diverse as the French Cathars of the 11th century, the radical wing of the 16th century Reformation, the Quakers of the 17th century, and the modern humanist tradition. As transcendentalist poet Walt Whitman wrote, "Do I contradict myself? Very well, I contradict myself. I am large, I contain multitudes." Likewise, our Unitarian Universalist tradition tries to embrace many sources of wisdom and practice as it continues to grow and evolve. So I invite you all to explore these new ways of being in harmony with nature, one another, and the sacred. May they guide you in seeking peace between the faith of your ancestors and your neighbors and our open and inclusive religious understanding, which has a history as long and as deep as the traditions of established Christian churches. May there be peace, respect, and mutual acceptance between us and our evolving faith traditions and the beliefs and practices of those in others' traditions whom we love and honor as people of sincere faith. Amen, and blessed be.
Thank you so much, Holly. I'd like to begin my reflection, first of all, by welcoming my husband, Gordon Crane, here. I didn't think that he would be here, and I'm very surprised and happy. Gordon and I have a son, Daniel, who was raised in this church, and speaking of pleasing his mother, he most likely is at the Unitarian service, Abundant Love, in Atlanta as we speak. We raised him here. And I mention that because I want to talk about these dogwood flowers that Meg, I just broke off. Where's Meg? That I just broke off the tree here. Kind of fits in with this. So maybe some of you have seen the postcard or the folklore that tells the story of the dogwood flower. That back in the day of Jesus, it was a tall, straight, strong tree. And it was the dogwood tree that was used to do the crucifixion of Jesus. And the dogwood tree was so saddened by that as Jesus died, all of the remaining dogwood trees curled up and made these beautiful flowers. You see the 4-petal flower, like a cross, Each one has a spot of blood at the tip of the bloom, and in the middle of the bloom is the crown of thorns. Anybody heard that before? Some say yes, So Daniel was a little guy, and we traveled to visit my parents in Montgomery, Alabama at Easter. And we were watching that Charlton Heston movie about Jesus. And Jesus was carrying the cross down the street, and then he was crucified. And little Daniel turned to me and said, "Mom, is this when the tree turns and makes those blossoms with the blood on the end of it?" My mother looked at me and said, "What kind of church is yours?" So I thought of those dogwoods as I walked in preparation for today. So my folks lived in Montgomery, Alabama when they retired, and we would make trips there. The story I want to tell you right now as my reflection is that Gordon's family hailed in Texas, and we would make road trips to Texas often. His mom lived there for a long time. His dad had passed away when our Daniel was born. My siblings still live in San Antonio, which is where my father was born. So about 10 years ago, Gordon and I are taking spring break, and we're traveling to Austin to spend the break with his mom, driving. We always drive. And it was a rainy weekend of travel. We thought we could make the trip to Austin in one day, but like I said, it was rainy. We couldn't do it. So about the time we were turning off Interstate 10, there was a state park there, Stephen F. Austin State Park. And we thought we'd just go over there and camp for the night. So it was close to 11 p.m. We put up the tent in the drizzle, and then I went to the bathhouse to get ready to go to sleep. And I saw a sign in the bathhouse that talked about sunrise service the next morning at the Stephen F. Austin statue there in the park. I wanted to go. So we woke up early on Easter morning, broke camp. It was still a bit drizzly. We drove to the Stephen F. Austin statue, and along the way we saw a sign that announced that the sunrise service was canceled due to the weather and to come later on to this chapel down the road. Well, we went to the statue anyway, and we walked around a bit in the light rain. Those of you who know Texas, it was beautiful. It was surrounded by a field of the bluebonnet and Indian paintbrush wildflowers. It was just so lovely. Gordon and I were the only ones there. And so we enjoyed it. And then we were walking back to our car, getting ready to drive on to his mom's place, when a car drove up very quickly. And there was a man driving the car with such angst. He said, "Did we miss the service?" I looked at Gordon and then looked at the man and said, "Yes, we finished just a bit ago, but I'd be happy to share our Easter thoughts with you." The man looked at me, certainly considering that I was the minister for the sunrise service. He looked at the woman in the car with him. I looked at Gordon, who had this expression of "what now" on his face. The man turned back to me. He seemed just a little bit calmer and expressed his thanks, but that they would probably just head on. So as Gordon and I took off for his mother's place, he asked with some relief how I would have conducted a service if the man and his family had accepted my offer. I wondered that too, and I was reminded of this experience. When reading Jim Palmer's letter to the editor of the Seneca paper last Tuesday, where he contemplated whether Christians are ignoring the messages of Jesus. Mr. Palmer wrote that Jesus, as a young teacher, went about preaching grace, tolerance, redemption, and loving your neighbor. Jesus talked to the poor, the oppressed, the outcasts, the skeptics, and others thought of by the traditional church of his time as unworthy of any attention. And these actions cost him his life. I hope that if I had delivered an impromptu message that Easter morning, I would have noted the beauty of the wildflowers surrounding us while offering hope through continuing to practice these core messages of Christianity. Some may use these practices of using wildflowers and messages of peace as heretical, against the norm. But as Linus said in the Peanuts cartoon, all right, so you believe in Santa Claus, and I'll believe in the great pumpkin. The way I see it, it doesn't matter what you believe, just so long as you're sincere. From Charles Schulz. May we be available and willing to offer our messages of peace, hope, and beauty when the moment arises, and of course, through actions of social justice. Voltaire noted that it is dangerous to be right in matters on which the established authorities are wrong. But we're in this together. In 2 weeks, we will celebrate Easter here. It will include wildflowers, or flowers of your choice. That will be our communion. And I look forward to sharing that time with you together. Let's sing.
129, 128,
1028
1028.
in the
Fire of commitment.
in the teal or up here. Thank you, everybody.
Don't be afraid of the teal hymn. This one's easy to say. as we walk out of this holy place into the equally holy world of nature, let us be grateful for those who carry through the ages the sacredness of nature and the basic goodness of our world, from the Jews to Pelagius to the Celtic Christians to the Transcendentalists to us. Let us reaffirm our kinship with the natural world as we enter the season of spring, renewal, and revival. Take the light with you. Carry the light. Share the light. Be the light. Blessed be.